My fiancé left me over his female best friend, and instead of grieving, I spent a year hunting him down. By the time I was standing in a courtroom, shaking, reading my own text messages out loud while a judge watched my face for every flinch, I already knew there was no version of this story where I come out looking okay. I want to tell you that up front because I'm not here to make myself the victim. I'm the reason this story exists. But to understand how I ended up there, sobbing in front of a stranger in a black robe, you have to go back to the beginning, back to when I still thought I was one of the good ones. I was 29 when I met him. My sister and I were out at a bar, nothing special, just a Friday, and a group of guys sent a round of drinks over to our table. He was one of them. Tall glasses that gave him this accidental nerd look he clearly knew worked in his favor, easy laugh, the kind of confidence that fills a room without trying. I was the opposite. Quiet, a little guarded, more comfortable watching a party than being the center of one. He came over anyway, sat down like he'd known me for years. Within a few months I was meeting his friends, and one name kept coming up before I ever met the person attached to it. Sandy. He talked about her the way you talk about a sister, except sisters don't usually get a nightly phone call that lasts an hour. I met her a few weeks later and I understood immediately why she mattered to him. They had a rhythm together, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at things that clearly went back 20 years. They'd met at some kind of summer camp when they were 8 or 9, and from what I pieced together over time, he basically adopted her into his life the way you'd bring home a stray. His family had money, or at least comfort. Hers didn't. I remember his older sister saying it to me once. Not unkindly exactly, just bluntly. That Sandy's family was the other side of the road. That he used to feed her, help her with homework, teach her things nobody at her house was teaching her, and then send her back home at night. A stray who kept coming back. That phrase stuck with me longer than it should have. At first I told myself it was sweet. Loyalty like that is rare. And honestly, for the first year or so, I mostly believed it. He was attentive with me, thoughtful in the small ways that matter. Remembered how I took my coffee, showed up early instead of on time, called just to hear about my day. It was easy to fold Sandy into the background of that and tell myself she was simply part of the package, the way some people come with a loud extended family or a dog that sheds on everything. You don't get to pick and choose the parts of someone you love, right? That's what I kept telling myself, like a little prayer whenever the discomfort crept back in. But the deeper I got into the relationship, the more that loyalty started to look like something else. She'd stayed over at his house as a teenager, sometimes in his room, and his parents never blinked. When he went away for a school trip once, she stayed in his bed at his parents' house while he was gone, like it was just understood that his space was her space too. In college, it kept going. Dorm rooms, apartments, sleepovers that were never framed as anything but, that's just Sandy. Nobody in his life questioned it because nobody ever had a reason to. He grew up believing this was normal, and honestly, so did everyone around him. I want you to sit with that for a second because I think a lot of you already know where the discomfort is starting to creep in. I felt it too. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it yet, and every time I tried to bring it up, I got the same answer. She's my best friend. Nothing has ever happened. You're overreacting. And for a while, I believed him, because I wanted to. Then he proposed on a Tuesday of all days, nothing fancy, just the two of us in our kitchen, after he'd clearly been building up the courage all evening. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. For about a week, I was the happiest I think I've ever been. Then wedding planning started, and with it came the first real test of everything I'd been quietly swallowing for 2 years. He asked her to be his best man. Not maid of honor standing on his side as a formality. His actual best man, in a tux, giving the speech. Standing next to him at the altar while I walked down it. I remember sitting across from him at our kitchen table when he brought it up, watching his face. The way he said it so casually, like it wasn't even a question worth asking me first. I already told her, he said. I figured you'd be fine with it. I wasn't fine with it. But I said okay anyway, because what else do you say when the man you love tells you this is who he wants beside him on the most important day of his life and frames it as already decided? It ate at me every single day after that. Every dinner where they'd disappear into their own inside jokes, every late night call that started with, "It's just Sandy like that," explained everything. And then a mutual friend pulled me aside one night, had a few drinks in her, and said the thing everyone else had apparently been thinking but not saying, that she didn't buy for 1 second that nothing had ever happened between them. I didn't sleep that night. A few weeks later, we were sitting on the couch. Some quiet Sunday, and I finally asked him straight out if there was history there. He got quiet in a way that told me the answer before he opened his mouth. He told me about a trip to Jamaica, years before we met, back when they were both single. He and Sandy had gone with another couple, a married pair they were friendly with, and one night it had turned into what he called a couple swap. Everyone naked, everyone switching partners. He swore up and down, looking me dead in the eye, that he and Sandy never touched each other that night, that he'd slept with the other man's wife and Sandy had slept with the husband, and that the two of them, despite being in the same room in the same swap, somehow never crossed that line with each other. You expect me to believe that, I said. You were both naked in a room together, and you're telling me you never once... I'm telling you the truth, he said. I've never lied to you. Here's the thing. I actually think he believed that. I think, in his mind, the physical act was the only line that mattered, and everything else, the sleepovers, the nightly calls, the years of intimacy that had nothing to do with sex but everything to do with closeness, didn't count because nobody's clothes came off. But I couldn't unhear it. I couldn't unsee the picture in my head of the two of them in that room. So I did something I'm not proud of, and it's the first domino in everything that followed. I gave him an ultimatum. I told him Sandy needed to be gone. Not scaled back, not less contact. Gone. No best man position, no daily calls, no more late nights on the phone. I stood in the middle of our living room with my arms crossed, feeling more powerful than I'd felt in months, and told him to choose, right there between her and me. He went quiet for a second. I actually thought, in that pause, that I'd won. I'll cut the bachelor party, he offered, his voice careful, like he was trying to diffuse something. I'll skip it. I'll cut back on the calls if that's what you need. But I'm not cutting her out of my life completely. She's been in it since I was 8 years old. You're asking me to erase 20 years of my life for a rumor and a trip that happened before I even knew you? It's not a rumor, I said. You told me yourself. I told you nothing happened, he said. There's a difference. I didn't back down. I told him it was her or me, full stop. And I remember genuinely believing that when I said it out loud, he'd finally understand how serious I was and give in. He didn't hesitate the way I expected him to. If I can't trust you to handle this, after everything I've told you, he said, standing up, already reaching for his keys, then this isn't going to work anyway. And that was it. He called off the wedding on the spot, right there in that living room, with the ring still on my finger and the invitations already half addressed on the counter. Within days, he'd packed his things, left his key on the counter, and stopped answering my calls entirely. I stood in that apartment surrounded by boxes of wedding magazines and seating charts I'd never get to use, and something in me just snapped. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because this is the part of the story that changes who I am in your eyes, and it should. I didn't grieve like a normal person grieves a broken engagement. I didn't cry into a pint of ice cream and slowly move on. Something in me broke, and instead of falling apart quietly, I turned it outward. I texted Sandy first, ugly things, blaming her for everything, and when that didn't get me an apology or a groveling ex-fiancé, I convinced myself I just hadn't tried hard enough yet. So tell me honestly, at this point in the story, are you already judging me? Because you should be. I need you to sit in that judgment for a second, because I did none of that for almost a year. I lost my job around this time too, which in hindsight was the worst possible thing that could have happened, because suddenly I had nothing but time, and I filled every hour of it with him. I started showing up outside his workplace, telling myself I just wanted 5 minutes to talk, that if he'd just hear me out, he'd understand. I tracked where he was going. I called his phone so many times he blocked me, so I found other ways in. His sister, his parents, mutual friends, anyone who might pass a message along. When his family stopped responding, I made fake accounts and messaged him from those instead, pretending to be someone else just to get a reaction. I found out where his new apartment was and started driving past it, sometimes parking outside for longer than I want to admit. He changed his phone number twice. I found the new one both times. My sister, who should have been the one telling me to stop, was right there with me instead. We'd sit up late at night going through his old photos, building elaborate theories, convincing each other that if we just found the right piece of proof, the whole thing would unravel and he'd come back begging. We fed each other's certainty that we were owed answers, that if we just pushed hard enough, the truth would come out and he'd realize he'd made a mistake. Looking back, we weren't investigating anything. We were performing a version of grief that had curdled into something else entirely, and we were doing it as a team, which somehow made it feel more justified than if either of us had been doing it alone. There were nights I'd sit in my car outside a bar I knew his friend group liked, just watching the door, telling myself I only wanted to see his face, that seeing him would somehow settle something in my chest. It never did. It only made the itch worse. I kept a mental log of his routine without even meaning to, what time he left for work, which days he stopped for coffee first when his car wasn't in the lot. I told myself this was normal, that anyone in my position would want to understand what their life could have looked like. Sandy was the one who finally tried to pull the emergency brake. She agreed to meet me, which honestly took more courage than I gave her credit for at the time, considering how much venom I'd sent her way. We sat across from each other, and she told me flatly that he was done, that he was talking to a lawyer about a restraining order if I didn't stop. I remember looking at her and genuinely believing in that moment that she was the toxic one, that she was the one manipulating the situation, that if she would just disappear from his life the way I originally wanted, none of this would be happening. I told her as much. I blamed her for being a threat instead of hearing the warning she was handing me on a silver platter. I didn't stop. If you're waiting for the moment reality finally caught up to me, here it is, because it's the moment that changed everything. My sister and I were following him one night in her car, and I know how that sentence sounds, believe me. I know. When we got pulled over, he'd called emergency services. We sat there on the side of the road with police lights washing red and blue across the dashboard. Both of us stunned into silence, and that was the first time in almost a year that the fog actually lifted enough for me to see myself clearly. Not the version of myself I'd built in my head, the wronged fiancé fighting for the truth. The actual version. A woman who had spent months tracking a man who had asked repeatedly to be left alone. That should have been the end of it right there. It wasn't quite, not fully, but it was the beginning of the end, and not long after, everything caught up with me anyway. I got served. Criminal charges. Stalking and harassment, filed by the state, not by him personally, which is a distinction my lawyer had to explain to me because I genuinely didn't understand the difference at first. I remember telling him I didn't think I needed representation, that I hadn't really done anything that bad, that I'd been wronged first. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head and told me flatly that I needed a lawyer immediately because this was not a civil matter and people had gone to prison for less. My mother paid for the attorney. It wasn't cheap, and it wasn't the last money she'd spend cleaning up after me. The meeting with the prosecutor's office was the moment the full weight of what I'd done finally landed, because it wasn't my version of events anymore. It was documentation, stacks of it. Printed messages I'd sent him, sent Sandy, sent his friends. Screenshots of posts I'd made about all of them. Recordings of voicemails my sister and I had left. Some of them just venting, some of them not so innocent. Call logs from his workplace, incident reports from his HR department, police reports and video. He'd been recording me the whole time, driving past his house, parked outside his new apartment. He'd known I was there. We hadn't been nearly as invisible as we thought. My mother sat through all of it. I watched her face change as each piece was laid out, and by the end she was openly crying, asking my sister and me how we could have done this, how her daughters had become people capable of this. I didn't have an answer for her then. I'm not sure I fully have one now. I remember the specific weight of that room, the way the folders kept coming, one after another, like there was no bottom to the pile. Statements from people I used to consider close friends, some of them saying nothing damning at all, just recounting nights I'd called them in tears, venting the way you vent to people you trust. Except now those private moments were being read into a permanent record. There were even printouts from accounts I'd created under other names, fake profiles I'd used to slide back into his orbit after he blocked the real me, and seeing those laid out on a conference table in someone else's hands made the whole thing feel less like a private spiral and more like evidence of a person I genuinely didn't recognize. The lawyer representing my ex wasn't some aggressive shark like you'd expect from a TV courtroom. He was almost gentle about it, which somehow made it worse. He told us plainly that my ex just wanted this over, wanted to move on, and that they weren't trying to bury us, they just needed it to stop. My attorney told me privately that I should take whatever deal was offered because if this went to trial, a felony charge and real prison time were both on the table, and he did not like our odds. I want you to picture the courtroom for a second because this is the part I still can't fully shake, even 10 years later. The judge was not gentle. She told me, without softening a single word, that people had done time for less than what I'd done, and that the only reason she wasn't handing down something far harsher was because my ex had spoken kindly about me to the prosecution. She asked if I understood the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor, and when I said I wasn't sure, she explained it to me in the coldest, clearest terms I've ever heard anything explained in. Then she asked how I would feel if the roles were reversed. If it had been him tracking me for a year, showing up at my job, calling my family, parking outside my apartment in the dark. That question broke something open in me right there in that room. And then she made me read them, out loud. My own words, the texts, the transcripts of the voicemails, starting with the ones to him, and moving to the ones I'd sent Sandy, which she told me flatly were the worst of the pile. My attorney tried to object, said the content had already been summarized for the court, and she told him, I remember this exactly, to sit down and let me keep reading because I needed to hear myself say it. Out loud, in front of everyone. I was sobbing so hard I could barely get the words out. She let me stop only long enough to breathe before telling me to, continue. My mother and my sister were both crying next to me. My own lawyer later admitted he'd worked with this judge for years and had never once seen her that visibly disgusted by a defendant's own evidence. At the end of it, she said clearly that she was not satisfied with the outcome. That if it had been entirely up to her, my punishment would have been far more severe. But my ex hadn't pushed for that. He hadn't gone after restitution in civil court, even though my attorney told me privately that with the volume of evidence against us, we would have lost badly and owed a fortune. Instead, we settled into an agreement outside the courtroom entirely. I got to keep the car, it had always technically been his, and he transferred the title over to me. He also agreed to keep paying for my therapy, which had already been part of the deal, for another year, past what the court required. His attorney was very clear that this wasn't a reward for anything I'd done. It was generosity, plain and simple, from a man who just wanted to close the door and never look back. I didn't see any of that coming. I'd spent a year telling myself he was the villain of this story, and he ended up being the most decent person in the entire room. The restraining order came with a long list, no contact in any form through any channel, for either me or my sister. No going near his workplace, no contact with his family, probation for 3 years, community service, a fine that took a bank loan at an ugly interest rate to cover, because by then I'd been out of work for so long I had nothing saved. Group therapy, individual therapy, all of it mandatory, all of it non-negotiable, and honestly, all of it exactly what I needed, even though it took me a long time to admit that. The fallout outside the courtroom was its own kind of punishment. Every single person from our old friend group cut me off completely, and I mean completely. No calls, no messages, nothing. Like I'd simply stopped existing to them. There was one exception, a woman I'll call Jenny, married to one of his friends at the time. She got divorced not long after my case wrapped up, and while she never said it outright, I've always believed it had something to do with everything that came out during the trial. She's the only one who kept in touch with me afterward, and even now I wouldn't call us close friends. More like two people who occasionally check in on each other's lives. For a long time after the trial, I'd check my phone out of habit, half expecting someone from the old group to text me the way they used to about nothing in particular. A meme, a dinner plan, a birthday reminder. Nothing ever came. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand that silence wasn't cruelty. It was just people quietly deciding they didn't want to be near whatever had happened to me. I don't blame them anymore. I think if I'd been on the outside watching a friend do what I did, I'd have made the same call. It was Jenny, actually, who eventually showed me the pictures. He got married in 2018. I wasn't invited, obviously, and I found out the way you find out most things now. Through someone else's phone, scrolling photos I had no business looking at. Sandy was there, exactly where you'd expect her to be, standing at his side as best man in a full tux, bow tie, and everything. In every photo, she looked completely at ease next to his new wife. The two of them laughing together at the beach, at the bachelor party, like they'd always been part of the same story. His new wife seemed pleasant enough in the pictures, if a little unremarkable, and they have 2 kids together now. I had a full meltdown the first time I saw those photos. Took me days to fully pull myself back together. Can I ask you something, honestly? If you'd been me, sitting there 10 years earlier hearing about a couple swap in Jamaica, would you have handled it differently? Because I've turned that question over more times than I can count, and I still don't have a clean answer. I think the honesty was never really the problem. I think what broke me was the ultimatum I gave myself no room to walk back from, and the year I spent afterward proving I couldn't be trusted with the very thing I said I wanted. His honesty. It took years of therapy to untangle all of it. My therapist pointed out something the judge had said that stuck with both of us. How would I feel? How would my family feel if a man had done to me exactly what I'd done to him? Sitting with that question honestly, not defensively, was the first real crack in the armor I'd built around my own version of events. I'd been the golden child growing up, a little too protected, a little too used to getting what I felt entitled to, and somewhere along the way, that turned into believing I deserved answers even from people who'd made it painfully clear they didn't want to give me any. I'm not the same person I was back then. I've done the work. Years of individual therapy, group sessions, victims advocacy programs, more community service than I ever expected to need. It wasn't linear. There were sessions where I sat in silence for the full hour because I couldn't find a single honest thing to say about myself that didn't make me want to walk out. There were others where something finally cracked loose and I cried the way I hadn't let myself cry back, when it actually would have helped. My second therapist, the one who finally stuck, once told me that accountability isn't a single moment in a courtroom. It's a practice you keep doing quietly, for years after everyone else has stopped watching. That stayed with me more than almost anything the judge said. I moved in with my mother a while back to help care for her as her health declined, which has been its own strange kind of full circle, going from the daughter she once had to bail out of criminal charges to the daughter managing her medications and doctor's appointments. I have a daughter of my own now, and because of everything that happened in those years, the record, the instability, the version of me that existed before I did the work, she lives primarily with her father. I see her, we have a relationship, but it's not the one I pictured for myself, back when I still thought my life was on a simple, straight track toward a wedding and a house and none of this. That's its own quiet grief I carry every day, and honestly, some days it's heavier than anything a judge ever said to me. My sister has struggled too, with her weight, with depression, though she's slowly finding her footing, mostly thanks to a small, ridiculous menagerie of pets that seem to keep her tethered to good days. We don't talk about that year much, even now. I think we're both still a little afraid of what we'd have to admit if we did. I work in retail, same as I did back then, though these days I've got a few coworkers I actually enjoy grabbing drinks with after a closing shift. A small, humble echo of the social life I used to take for granted without ever once being grateful for it. Dating hasn't gone well. I won't pretend otherwise. I think most people can sense, even without knowing the specifics, that I carry something heavy, and I haven't yet figured out how to explain a restraining order and a felony-adjacent plea deal on a second date without watching someone's face change in real time. And I won't sit here and tell you I'm perfectly cured of every impulse either. Every once in a while, curiosity still gets the better of me, and I'll find myself scrolling his wife's social media or one of his old friends' pages just to see. I'm not proud of it. I don't act on it, but I think it's important to admit it, because pretending I walked away completely healed would be its own kind of lie, and I've told enough of those already. If there's one thing I want you to take from all of this, it's that we only ever hear one side of a story. And back when I first posted about all this online, all those years ago, most people only heard mine. A handful of strangers actually pushed back, told me I was spiraling, told me to get help instead of validation. I ignored almost all of them. If somebody in your life is circling the same drain I was, obsessive thoughts, anger they can't put down, a refusal to accept that no means no, please don't just let them vent into an echo chamber. Get them actual help. And if that person is you, if you're reading this and something in your chest just tightened because it sounds familiar, there's no shame in asking for help before a judge has to make you understand why you need it. I used to think honesty was the only thing that mattered in a relationship, that if someone told you the truth, you were obligated to accept it and stay. I don't believe that anymore, not entirely. I think you're allowed to hear a hard truth and decide it's not something you can live with. What you're not allowed to do is decide that means you're owed a say in what happens next, or a right to chase someone down until they give you the ending you wanted. That's the line I couldn't see back then, and it's the line I think about more than almost anything else these days. So tell me, was I the villain of this story, or just someone who broke under the weight of her own entitlement and never should have been left alone with that kind of anger? I think I already know the answer. I just needed 10 years in a courtroom to finally say it out loud.